All right, good afternoon. My name is Ashley, and my project is about the Clutter Family Case that happened in Kansas in 1959. Um, I just want to get this out that if there's any background noises, I do apologize for that, but it is out of my control. So I'm just gonna get that out, and I may stumble over some words and like stutter, but just please pardon that. Okay, so why isn't my mouse working? Yeah, there you go. Okay, so. My central question for my project is what was the life difference between the victims and the murderers, and would they have killed if their life before the event was different? So my project is based off the book In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. He is not involved in this case directly, but this case did happen in Holcomb, Kansas in 1959. And when he heard about this case, from like the television or news broadcasting, he decided to travel all the way to Kansas, and he kind of like ingested himself to be in the case, where he spent 6 years of his life interviewing and researching and reviewing everything about the case and trying to know everything about the case and everyone involved. And his book was finished and published in 1966. So the book starts off by introducing the Clutter family and how the family is viewed from the public's eye. We, unfortunately, are not able to see how the family functioned within inside. We are able to see how it was from the public's view. But for the murderers who were in this case, we are able to see a little more inside because luckily Truman was able to interview them and communicate to them face to face. So the victims is four, even though the family is six, two of them moved out, and one of the four victims is the father, Herb Clutter. He is a wheat farmer. He is a well-respected businessman. He's very strict. He's known to be strict in discipline and religious. He symbolizes the American dream where everything's successful. A lot of people admire him and love him. And people know that he does have some, I don't want to say quirks, but one of his things that he does is when interviewing employees, for them to work for him, one of his questions is if they drink, because he does not want them drinking as long as they're employed with him. He's very strict on that. A lot of people know that. Another thing of him is his businessman. He does not carry cash. He's very much well known for not carrying cash. Everyone knows that, and he only does checks. I believe it's said that he thinks it's more reliable, but he does not carry cash at all. He did, however, marry Bonnie Clutter. She is known to be kind of sick, but like sick because she is depressed. She suffers from chronic depressions, and there's some yeah, there's some people who suspect that she might also suffer from psychosomatic illness, but that's not confirmed. But it is more leaning towards that she did suffer from depression, and every time she would enter a room, she brought some sort of fragility in the atmosphere, so people would be more quiet, more gentle. They understand that she would be very often very cold. If she was extremely cold, she would just stay in her room pretty much the whole day. So she would symbolize the struggles behind the perfect family. Even though she was depressed, I do want to say that she was very much a loving and caring mother to her four kids. One of those four kids, the youngest daughter, her name is Nancy Clutter. She's also a victim of the murder. She is a very bright and popular girl. She's very popular for good reasons. She was very active in the community. She would help in her church, her school. She would help little girls and younger girls with their activities, and they would look up to her. Everyone knows that she is a very busy girl, and people knew that, but she always made time for others, which is why people are very much saying that she is very much a ladylike and growing really beautiful and bright and just really lovely. She ran the house when her mom was having one of her sick, like quote unquote episodes, and she would symbolize the youthful promise and innocence. The youngest member of the family, Kenyon Clutter. Kenyon Clutter, I said he is opposite from his sister. He's known to be introverted, shy, and bookish. He was very intelligent, and they would people knew that he was also mechanically inclined. So he would work on his truck that he bought with his money, which he saved because his father really, since he was a businessman, he always taught his children to be very safe with money. So he would be fixing on his truck or he would be working on his wooden chest that he's making for one of his older sister's engagement gift. Unfortunately, he never got to finish it before he died. But he symbolizes quiet potential and unfulfilled promise. So before they died, this is pretty much a basic layout on how their day went. The family woke up and Herb just ate an apple and a glass of milk because that's just how much of a, I don't want to say health freak, but that's the first word that comes to mind. And, after everyone starts the day, Nancy already started helping younger girls with their activities, helping them bake a cherry pie or helping them with their trumpet lessons. And throughout the day, Kenyon and Herb, they went to 4-H meetings. So they went to some community meetings and then they would come home and Kenyon would be working on his chest that he's going to give to his sister. And Herb would be out working on his land. Because keep in mind, this family was really wealthy. They had horses, they had a big yard, they sold apples or apple farms, and I believe berries. Not 100% sure, but they had a pretty big land and they had people working on it because of how big it was. That was pretty much their business. And during that time, Nancy had a boyfriend named Bob Rupp. Bob Rupp, right before they died, he visited Nancy and they hung out from around, I want to say 7 to 8. That's when he came to the house and he didn't leave until around 11. He stayed with the family in the living room with Nancy, her brother, and her dad watching TV, and he was the last person to see the family alive. The murderers that killed the family, there's two of them. One of them is Richard Hickok. In the book, he goes throughout Dick. In this presentation, also, he's referred to as Dick. He is a convict for burglary and bad checks. He has two ex-wives. One of them he has 3 children with, and his second ex-wife he has 1 kid with. And he's an all-American boy. He's what you would call the all-American boy childhood experience. I will go into that a bit more, but that's just pretty much about him. His partner in crime, the one that helped him with his murders, his name is Perry Smith. Perry is also a convict. He did it because he was a convict for theft. I think he stole a rifle gun and for prison escapes. Oh, that should be escape. He escaped prison once, which pretty much made his sentence a bit longer. He had a very traumatic childhood. Unlike Perry, unlike Dick, Perry's parents weren't really in the picture when he was around elementary age. He is kind of a little more complicated, both his life and Perry himself. But this is how the two were able to meet. They both went during some time to Kansas State. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right. Penitentiary? I assume it's prison. I'm going to assume it's prison. So Perry Smith went to the penitentiary in March 1956 for burglary and jailbreak. 2 years later, Dick also went to the same one for theft and bad checks. And then a year later, so during that time, they were able to meet, they talked, and that's when Dick noticed Perry and his talents, I'm gonna say. And Dick made a mental note that, oh, if I ever need to do something, I can always count on Perry and he'll help me do it. A year later, Perry Smith was able to leave 1959 on parole, but he was not allowed to enter Kansas. A couple months later, Dick also left on parole on August, but he was allowed to stay in Kansas because his father was in Kansas, so he was allowed to stay with his father, and Dick was also able to secure a job in Kansas, which is why he was allowed to stay in Kansas, unlike Perry, his parole order was not to enter Kansas. A little more months later, November 14, 1959, so the same year the two left, all the family Clutter died, the ones that were at home. So this is how the day went before the killing. So after Dick and Perry met up, they traveled 400 miles. And during that trip, especially in the book, it talks a lot about their lives and the plans that they were going to do, like how they were going to commit the crime and what they were going to do after. We were able to get a glimpse, or the reader was able to get a glimpse of the two, and we start to see their point of view. So we learned a lot about the lives of Dick and Perry. For Dick, his parents were in the picture, though his father did leave at some point, and when his mother died, Dick had to go to Salvation Army, which is like a little orphanage, but he was able to go back with his father and he did high school, he got his high school experience, he became an athlete. Oh, I'm very sorry for my background noise. He is an athlete. He was pretty smart. He did pretty well in school. He was above average than the education wise during that time. So he was socially well adjusted. He knew the social norms, and that came in handy when he went on the run after killing the family. But before that, he had a really bad car accident which altered his face. As you can see, his face is kind of lopsided on the left. And after that car accident, his parents, but normally his parents said that there was some sort of shift in him where he just suddenly became not the same boy he was before, is how his parents said in the interview. He then became a little more colder and more manipulative, especially with Perry and other people that they met. That's how Dick was able to do a lot of bad checks. He would like play off that he was a rich guy who knew what he was doing, and that's why a lot of the checks were pretty much approved by the people until it went through and didn't pass, which is why it wasn't a good check. Perry is the one that initiated this plan of killing the Clutter family. He planned it all out. He knew who to target. He knew where to go, and he's the one who chose Perry to be his right hand man. And some more about Perry. Perry's background is a little more sad. In the book, it talks about Perry a handful a lot more than Dick, which is why I'm a little more better with Perry's background. For Perry, his father abused his mother, and his mother ran away with him and his siblings. And then they stayed together until his mother committed suicide. By then, him and his siblings went to an orphanage, specifically a Catholic orphanage where the nuns would abuse Perry almost daily because Perry would wet the bed, so he was a bedwetter, and he would wet the bed and he would be more abused by them. So when he was younger, he witnessed his father abusing his mother, and I I don't think it's far of a stretch to say that his father probably also abused Perry himself. So he probably at least got some abuse before going to the orphanage, got a lot more abuse by nuns in the orphanage, and Perry wasn't very predictable. He had a lot of emotional shifts. You would see that he's a timid little boy who's scared, and then suddenly he became more colder and darker. And he was kind of described that you kind of sensed within yourself that he's predictable and could and is able to do XYZ bad stuff. In his past, he had a motorcycle accident, and it was not as bad as Dick's, but it did kind of ruin Perry's legs, and it looked weird, and Perry was insecure of that. But Perry, instead of him being the one who initiated the plan like Dick, Perry was the primary trigger man. He would be pretty much, I don't want to say muscle because not entirely sure, but he's pretty much the muscle of the plan, while Dick was the brain. And Perry would be the one acting the whole act, even though he was like the sidekick of Dick. It would be Perry that's acting the act, and Dick would pretty much be like whispering to Perry, "You should do this," and Perry acts it out. So the difference of lives between both the family and the murderers. The family, on one hand, is very much respected. They are well known in the community. Community would provide them anything the family needs because they trust the family. While the murderers, Dick and Perry, they were convicts, so people didn't trust them. And even though Dick was a bit cunning, you still wouldn't trust him with your drink, if that makes sense. Um, the family did not have any trauma. They didn't have anyone go out and abuse them. They didn't have anything remotely similar to what Dick and Perry went through, which they had a pretty rough childhood. Education, the family, both children were in high school when they died, and Herb also got a high school degree. I'm not entirely sure about by Bonnie, but I know the kids, they were Nancy was a straight A student. Kenyon was a really smart and intelligent kid. So their education was really good. While Dick and Perry, Dick could have 100% pursued more, except for his financial system during that time, especially with his family. They didn't have a lot. So Dick didn't pursue further. While Perry, on the other hand, had little to none. I believe he did not have, he stopped his education journey around third grade. And the family had a lot of support. They could ask teachers, they could have other family members, neighbors, their community, the church. If anything happened, they could always ask for support from someone else. While Dick and Perry, they didn't have anyone they could turn to. But what they both did have were morals. They knew the difference between right or wrong. They knew what they were and weren't supposed to do. But what we don't know, as far as you guys don't know why they killed. So after doing some research, I've noticed that there are some motives on why people kill. Each scenario on why someone kill could fall into the four L's: lust, love, loathe, and loot. And a lot of people assume that if you have some sort of mental disorder, that's fully the reason. Like, oh, this person killed this person just because of their mental disorder. And that's not actually the case. The percentage of that being the case is really low. It plays a factor. Yes, I'm not going to deny that. It does play a factor, but that cannot be the only reason why someone commits murder. What is a little more higher is hostile impulses. You're just full of emotion in the middle of the act, full of adrenaline. That's more calming than just pure blaming mental disorder. This is a graph. It's linked, it's towards the end of the presentation in my resources slide. But we could see, so this graph pretty much shows the relationship of the murderer and the victim. Most of the time, it's coworkers, customers and clients, acquaintances, and relatives. As we can see, most of the time it's robbers, so it's stranger to stranger. A quote I got from Journal of Forensic Psychology Research and Practice is self-control is a core psychological trait monitoring the relationship between hostility, neuroticism, oh my goodness, and the impulsiveness of the crime. Homicide offenders with high levels of hostility channel their antisocial tendencies according to their self-control levels. So this quote pretty much says that depending on your self-control also helps affect the way you express your hostility and impulsiveness. So if a murderer does not have a lot of self-control, it might be overkill. And so self-control is really important. And a lot of people have the thoughts of killing others, but they have self-control, which is why they're not murderers. They just have some sort of thoughts that they need help with. But self-control is pretty much a big thing that separates just people who have just bad thoughts and just bad thoughts in general versus people who actually act murderers. That's going to be really important. So after analyzing through both those and some more research, some more evidence, it's safe to say that even in a better upbringing, the risk of murdering lowers, but it's not eliminated. So even if Dick and Perry, since they had pretty bad childhood and past, even if we make it better, that does not mean them murdering people is gone. It may lower 100%, but it's not gone because there's other factors at play. The genetics and environment. If we change the environment, there's always still genetics. And there's always the in the moment emotions. So we have to keep those in mind. But the thing is, we don't know why Dick and Perry killed, which we will, or later on in the presentation. But like I said, both of them have morals. They know what both right and wrong is. And there was a time where Dick and Perry could have not killed. They literally hesitated and they could have stopped and turned around. But clearly, that was not the case. So this is how the murder happened. After the long ride, they arrived, and this is when Dick hesitated, right when they arrived to the house, when they pulled up to the house. Dick hesitated, and Perry noticed that Dick just stopped and was thinking it out. And Perry kind of chickened him. Not literally, but he kind of made aware that Dick is stopping. And Dick is going through all this whole plan that he just did just to get here. This whole planning, this whole buying all the supplies, this whole time wasting all the way going here just for him to stop, which is why they went ahead with the plan. One of the really main things that Dick really did not want was to leave any witness alive. They all had to be gone. And Dick reminded Perry that, and then they went into the house. We have to know that in this neighborhood, the neighbors they weren't concerned with locking their doors. So the doors are open, always open. Almost everyone has their doors open because they're not concerned. This was back then, 1959. So people left their doors open. So they were able to go into the house and they found the family. They tied them up and they cut up the landlines. So once they tied up Herb, they asked him where the other landlines are. And he told them there's one in the office, one in the kitchen. I think there was one more else, but those are the two main ones I know. And they cut those out so they don't have any communications to the outside world. And then they started raiding the house. They started looking through the house and they asked Herb if where's the safe? Where is the safe with the money? Herb keeps saying that there is no money. There is no money. And they didn't believe that. And they couldn't find any money. They found Nancy's purse and Herb's wallet. They took just some cash. Because remember, they don't carry cash. So they found just a little less than $50 cash. And since there was no safe and they can't leave any witnesses, they had to kill them all. So they slashed Herb's throat and then they shot him. And then they shot Kenyon, Bonnie, and Nancy in that order at close range at their heads. And then they took some few possessions. So they took Kenyon's radio and they took two other things, but the main one was the radio. That was really emphasized in the book. After they took the money, they just left all the family lying there and they left. So we know that the family is religious. We know that the family is religious, and they like, since they're of strong faith, they want others to know their faith. And so they would take two of Nancy's friends to church every Sunday. And those two girls realized that something was wrong and that the family had not gone to pick them up. And so they went into the house to figure out where is everyone. And they went upstairs. They kept calling for Nancy to see where she was. No answer. It felt really weird for them because the house is really quiet and they saw no dishes were made. There's no sign of evidence that there was any activity in the morning. They went upstairs to Nancy's room, and there they found Nancy tied on the bed with blood on the walls and on Nancy herself. The two girls screamed, ran downstairs, and went outside where one of the friends' father was outside waiting for them. Because the father, he had his work shoes on and he had never went inside the Clutter's house, so he did not feel appropriate going inside the house. So he allowed his daughter and his daughter's friend to go inside the house and figure out why the family has not, or where the family was and how it's going inside. When they realized that, when he realized that his daughters just witnessed all dead bodies, he called the police, emergency services arrived, and that's when the whole investigation started investigating. And and we have to know what happened to the community. What they started investigating, but of course they can't figure out immediately. So the community was really scared. They didn't know what to do. This is the first time anything like this has happened. Now they finally start locking doors. And since it's a small town, it's not super small, but it's pretty small. They start making theories and gossiping to each other and speculating each other and accusing of one another. And there's a lot of mourning going on because the family was very much well loved. Even the school had a day where the kids didn't have school so they could attend the funeral of the family. The community was very much affected that some of them even started saying that if it was another family or someone else that died, people wouldn't have been as scared as they were. But since it's the Clutter family who have done nothing wrong, who people respected and liked and loved, things were different. And a lot of the people in the community knew that the Clutter family pretty much represented what America wanted to be during that time. And since they died, a lot of people were extremely scared, and even the wives of the detectives and sheriff were very frightened. So after the murder, Dick and Perry left and they went for a long drive. They went back and Dick dropped off Perry back at his hotel while Dick went home to his parents. He ate dinner and acted as if nothing major had just happened. And the only thing that was out of the ordinary that his father noticed is that Dick fell asleep instead of watching the game. Mind you, this time is around Sunday night because they killed the family from Saturday night, so November 14 midnight, to November 15 extremely early in the morning. So around that time frame, which is why they spent all day November 15 driving back. And Dick fell asleep, and his father only noticed that was weird because Dick would always watch the game and do anything but watch the game and do nothing but. But instead, he fell asleep, which the father wasn't really concerned. He just knew it was kind of odd. After that, Dick and Perry left and began their new plan of action, which was starting a new life at Mexico. And during the drive, by then, news broadcasts started streaming everywhere about the case, and Perry read some newspapers, and he kept bringing up about what if they get caught? What if we get caught? What if they somehow track everything towards us? And Dick keeps dismissing it. He just doesn't believe it. He's like, "Oh, you're just being too paranoid. It's fine." But Perry keeps bringing it up, and Dick soon starts having back in the mind thoughts because of how irritated he is. He starts having those back in the mind thoughts of how Perry should also be counted as a witness because Perry is a witness. Perry knew that both him and Dick just killed 4 family members. And Dick starts thinking that he should also just kill Perry and just go. But he doesn't do that. But it was a thought that he had. So some theories back in Kansas that 3 lead detectives made that actually happened. This is a scenario. This is an event that happened with the man and Herb. So the man had a disagreement with Herb, and the man and his son, since they were really mad at Herb, they went to Herb's house to have it out with him. And mind you, they both were drunk during this time. But then Herb noticed them and grabbed his gun and scared them off. So Detective Buns thinks that it's this man that killed both. No, that it's this man that killed the family because of this incident that happened a while back. The second scenario that actually happened was there was a man who became hostile with Herb because he believed that Herb shot and killed the man's hunting dog. And so when the detectives went to inspect the farm or barn house of the man, they found a rope tied with the same knot that was used on the family, which is why they suspected the man because the same knot that was on the rope was tied for the family. And the last scenario that a detective made was that it was a robbery gone wrong because the evidence was that there was Herb's wallet and Nancy's purse open on the floor. But they also thought that maybe the killer took the money to mislead and made us, the police, think the reason was a robbery. So the murderers killed the family, but took some cash to make the law enforcers think that it was a robbery. That was the third scenario. But here's the actual connection, the actual reason. During the time Dick was at Kansas State Prison, he met Floyd Wells. He actually cellmated with him, I think June. And he told Dick about Herb because soon, during the time they were cellmates, they started talking about their jobs. And Floyd let slip that he worked for Clutter, a really wealthy man that helped him during some winter season. And he told Dick about how wealthy the family was. And then soon Dick like got a light. It lit a little fire in him, and he started to get an obsession of the topic of Herb Clutter because Floyd said that there was a safe in the office that had around $10,000, and Dick made elaborate plans after he knew that Herb Clutter had a safe with $10,000. Dick wanted to know everything about it. You want to know who Herb Clutter is, what he did, what was his schedule like, who was his family, who lived in his house, where is his house, how can we find this house, what would be the road to find his house, what's the layout of the house, who lived upstairs, who was across down the hall. He asked Floyd so much questions so that Dick would be able to make elaborate plans to rob the family and get rid of the witness. He would also keep going on and on about exactly how he's going to do it, where he was going to shoot them, and he kept saying to Floyd that he would make sure to not get any witnesses. So about this time now, the news of the case reached even at prison. And Floyd Wells, right after the murder, he heard about the case and how investigators are turning to the public for any information. When he heard this, he wasn't disbelief. He didn't report it immediately. He heard about the case. He's like, "Huh, I remember talking about this to Dick, but I'm not sure." And so he didn't say anything. And he just spent some time knowing about it, but he didn't say anything. Until sometime he starts to feel uneven and uneasy if he should tell the police because he thinks it's just a coincidence. But luckily, fortunately, eventually he did report it. And in the interview he had with the police, he included how Dick wanted to know absolutely everything and how he was going to take a plan of action. Floyd Wells included to the police how Dick also said that he would recruit Perry Smith to help him with the crime because Perry Smith is a guy you could always count on. So after killing both Dick and Perry, stayed in the Kansas City area for a little bit, and then they moved to Mexico. They went to Mexico and they lived there for just some time. Then they sold a car and hitchhiked their way through Cali to Nevada. And then after Nevada, they went to Iowa, where they stole a car and returned to Kansas. And from Kansas, they went all the way to Florida. And from Florida, they went back to Nevada, and they got caught in Nevada. During this time, they continued with clearly theft. They stole a car and bad checks. They kept with their bad checks. And sooner or later, the police, as we know, were informed of the plan. Now they're looking for Dick and Perry because they're suspects. And sooner or later, they find them, but they don't want to arrest them for a suspect of a crime because they don't want to let it slip that the police are following them and catching on real close. So instead, both guys were arrested for not following the parole and for bad checks. And of course, it started as a normal interview. Where were they? Oh, they were at Kansas. And what did you do at Mexico? And how was Nevada? And exactly what happened in this state and what happened here. It started off as a normal interview. Slowly but surely, it started pointing towards the incident in Kansas and if they knew anything about it since the two were in Kansas. The police started asking the two if they knew anything about this big murder case that happened in Kansas, and both of them said no. And a day later, they asked again, and more interviews going on, and more interrogation. And I think 1 to 2 days later, Dick confessed. And he said that Perry killed them all. That Perry's the one that killed Herb, Bonnie, Nancy, and Kenyon. Dick didn't kill anyone. It's Perry that did all the killing. And the police say that to Perry, and Perry says, no, he killed both the guys. So Perry says that Perry himself killed both the guys, while Dick killed both the girls. And the police take that, and then they start going on their way to Kansas City for the trial to start. And sooner or later, Perry decides to change his statement and say, I'll sign my statement as long as we switch my story back to Dick's. So in other words, Perry said, even though Perry said that he killed half of the family and Dick killed the other half, now Perry wants to change it and wants to say that he killed all the family while Dick didn't. And this didn't happen like in a week. This happened quite some time. And so during the trial, which obviously it took a while, Perry argued that his history of mental illness is my jading factor, but both men were still found guilty and sentenced to death. After conviction, both men appealed their sentences, but it was, of course, denied. And then they spent around 6 years on death row, and then they were executed by hanging in Kansas State. So I noticed that Perry tried to argue that it was his mental illness should be taken into a factor, but the court did not allow that and did not see it as very approving. And they even if they took it into some type of like minor factor, but they took it in, they were still found guilty. So it's pretty much how the trial went. Found guilty, and they died after spending 6 years in death row. So here's pretty much like an overview. While the Clutter family were a stable family, the murderers, Dick and Perry, they were driven by desperation and greed. That's why they killed. They killed for $10,000. They killed an innocent family they have never met, except hearing about it from a cellmate in prison. Never met the family. Went to the family's house, killed the family, took as much as they can. The maximum amount of money both men took from the family was less than $50. They killed 4 people for less than $50 and some mere possessions they took from the house. That was a really big difference between the family and both Dick and Perry. We also learned throughout this presentation that genetic factors and environmental factors help with the results of becoming a murderer. We know that Dick and Perry, what was factored into why they killed was because of their debt. Dick had a lot of debt, especially with his bad checks and his car accident. He was left in a lot of debt. They both killed because of abuse and traumatic childhood and impulsive actions. That's some main reasons on why they killed. And we also learned that even if your environment is positive, the chance, I'm very sorry, please believe that's chance, the chance of being a murderer drastically decreases, but it is still there. So again, even though your environment is really all happy and rainbows, you yourself are still the same as if you were in a different environment, you're still the same. So it does not mean you becoming a murderer is automatically gone. Sometimes it's just in you. Sometimes you may not become a murderer, but you just become a criminal. It's most of the time it's you. So that's some overview about that. And back to my essential question, what was the life difference between the victims and the murderers? And would they have killed if their life before the event was different? Again, the life difference was stable family versus desperation and greed. It was a family who worked hard because Herb actually he earned his way to becoming a businessman. While Dick could have 100% tried more for education. Or Dick was an ambulance driver. He could have stayed in his job and worked his way up. Perry did join the army. He joined the Korean War. And there was many times where Perry could have changed. And my second part of my question would have been, would they have killed if their life before the event was different? Well, to answer all my questions, I'd say my answer analysis. If both murders had a better upbringing similar to the Clutters, they would still have the same mindset. Perhaps they may have not killed, but maybe something else. Like I said, a crime. They may have committed a crime, but they may have not killed. So changing their environment won't change how they truly are. An analogy that I made myself to help me understand this was a pumpkin seed. The pumpkin seed is the genetic of the person. Even though they have the genes of becoming a murderer, they're not a murderer yet. They have the genes of becoming a murderer, like the factors, so they could easily become very hostile. That's a key trait into becoming a murderer. I think it goes related to the warrior gene. A warrior gene is a gene that a lot of serial killers have that allows them to be a little more impulsive and hostile. The pumpkin seed. Back to my analogy. The pumpkin seed is a pumpkin seed, but it's not the pumpkin yet. Unless it's in the right in the correct environment, it's gonna become a pumpkin. If we take that seed out and we put it in a different environment, it's still gonna become a pumpkin, maybe a little bit different. The same thing with this. If if both men were to have a better environment, they themselves, their genes and their mindset and their self-control would have still been the same. If the Clutter family were to grow up in the same environment Dick and Perry had, they would have still been positive. Just like how Perry had a sibling, a sister. Perry had a sister, and that sister, she was able to grow up and she started a family. She got married, she got a husband, she has a house. She was able to live happily. That shows the difference between the Clutter family and the Dick and Perry. I'm okay. And that pretty much shows that would they have killed if their life before they met was different? No, but they probably would have still been very similar. They probably would have maybe committed some petty crimes, but they would have still done some crimes because they themselves are the same. So unless they changed themselves, then yeah, they probably wouldn't have murdered anyone. But that's pretty much my answer to my question related to the case. And that's my resources. Thank you for listening to my rant, and please forgive me for all my mistakes that I made throughout this whole thing. I'm very sorry, but thank you so much for your patience. Have a good day.